Hello and welcome to From Our Perspective, two therapists, moms, and a mic. My name is Katie Truax.
And I'm Claudia Glassman.
And we thought we might talk about bullying today.
Yes, let's do it.
It seems like a pretty, I want to say hot topic, but it's not a new topic, right? It's been a topic for quite some time, this concept of bullying.
Absolutely.
And it definitely seems to be a sensitive topic, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, question for you.
Hmm.
What is your current, what's your understanding of bullying?
That's not fair. I was going to ask you that.
No, you can't ask me that. Because it's changed over the years, right?
Yeah.
I think what was acceptable now, whether or not it should have been acceptable, we can argue, right? But that was somewhat acceptable childhood shenanigans.
Mm-hmm.
Is now not. And, I work with kids, I work with parents, and I hear the word bullying a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And while obviously it's definitely prevalent and it's out there, I don't know if I would categorize all the behavior that is perceived as bullying. Does that make sense? Because sometimes it's a kid makes a snarky comment that was unkind for sure, but does that make a bully? Or does that just make a child who was not kind in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I truly, I don't know. I literally was going to ask you, should I read you what Google says bullying means?
You can. When in doubt, we Google.
True mental health professionals who go to Google for this, but that's okay. All right. This says to seek. Well, no, hold on. This is a verb. So, all right, the verb bully. Seek to harm, intimidate, or coerce someone perceived as vulnerable. So seek to harm, intimidate, or coerce. So it implies that there's an intent, right? There's an intent to cause harm, to intimidate, or to coerce. So someone who's perceived as vulnerable. So kind of what's also implied is that there's somebody that has at least a perception of having more power, and someone who has less power, and that the person who has more power has an intent to harm the person who has less.
Yes. So along those lines, according to stopbullying.gov.
That's probably a more reliable source than Google.
For you. Yeah, but so yes, there has to, in order to be considered bullying, the behavior must be aggressive, which I suppose we can define a million different ways.
Yeah.
There has to be an imbalance of power, which is what you were just saying. So either physical strength, access to embarrassing information, or popularity to control or harm others. So kind of using this power dynamic to control or harm others. And repetition. Bullying behaviors must happen on more than one occasion. Then they go into types of bullying. So you've got verbal bullying, teasing, name calling, inappropriate comments, taunting, threatening harm. Social bullying, leaving someone out, kind of telling people not to be friends with this child, etc. And then physical bullying, which is the hitting, pushing, spitting. And I think that's kind of like where bullying was when I was a kid, right? Like if someone was like physically targeting you repeatedly, then you got the bullying label. I think a lot of this other stuff that was probably should have been categorized as bullying was like kind of swept under the rug a little bit, right? Like, oh, he's just calling you names every day of your life. Like it wasn't a thing.
Well, so what brought this to mind for me? So Ellie had a little experience this week at school. So if you guys haven't heard us talk before, my daughter is 10. I almost said 8. That's a time warp. What year is it? She's 10. And so she's just, this is her 5th grade year. And we're, almost 2 months in, a month and a half in, 2 months. And we had some social conflict. I don't know if conflict drama. We called it girl drama last year. It just riddled through the entire year. I mean, there were mornings when she cried, didn't want to go to school. There were mornings when she was sick to her stomach. on the way to school or on the way or once she got to school, where like on the weekends she's not sick to her stomach and no change in anything she's eating, or no virus, bacteria, fever, anything like that, just pure tummy nerves. And we had talks with teachers and principals and the guidance counselor and interventions and you name it. And she's in a school that has a very small class size, and there's a lot of benefits to that. But what we're learning is one of the drawbacks is that I think last year they had 12 kids in the entire fourth grade, and it was like 6 and 6. So 6 girls, 6 boys. And when she was younger, she played with boys a lot. But now as they've gotten older, that doesn't really seem to be a thing that the girls want to do or that the boys want to do, despite my kind of encouragement of like, go hang with the boys. They don't do these kinds of things, right? And so she's got these 6 girls, and they're just locked in hard with one another. And um, fourth grade last year was kind of this in between. She's at a school that goes from preschool up to 12th grade, and so she doesn't want to play with the third graders. And when she's in fourth grade, that's not cool. But like the fifth and sixth graders are really like too old to want to play with the fourth graders either. So she was kind of like pigeoned with these girls, and it was constant battles about whose friend is whom, and what you have to do to be my friend, and you can't be with this person's friend if you're going to be with my friend. And you know just all kinds of things, right? And there was one gal that seemed to be somewhat leading the pack on this stuff. And when the gal was there, things were a lot worse. And when the gal would be gone, say out of town on vacation, things got easier. Mm-hmm. And so the guidance counselor promised us, she's like, hold tight, like fourth grade, it's always a hard transitionary phase, and fifth grade is going to be so much easier, so much easier, so much easier. Well, fast forward, here we are, and it has been easier. It's been a lot easier. And 2 days ago, I went to pick her up from school, and she got in the car. She goes, Mom, I have to tell you what happened today, which is somewhat rare, And I'm like, okay, what happened today? And she described where she and one other girl went to look for the rest of the girls at lunch to sit and eat as usual, and couldn't find them anywhere, and kept looking around and found them under a stairwell of some sort. She said, where we're not allowed to be, Mommy, we're not supposed to be there. But like this gal who was kind of seemed to be a big part of the problem last year was kind of standing up and kind of being like the ringleader for the rest of the fifth grade girls. And I think that there might have been 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 total girls there. And then Ellie and her other friend walked up and said, what are you guys doing? And it was a lot of, without going into the play-by-play, right? A lot of things like, well, we're not your friend, and a lot of eye rolling. And I think another gal from 6th grade had come up too, and they said something like, what are you doing here? Like, you're not our friend, you don't belong here. And things like that, right? So, and again, I'm kind of new to this because, again, if you guys haven't listened to us talk much, I work mostly with adults. And so I don't get to hear this a lot from kiddos. I hear some adults tell me about how they were impacted as kids by being bullied, but it's kind of more of like part of a big package, right? It's not anymore, with adults, it's not the primary reason they're coming in for therapy as having been bullied as a child, right? Like, so I'm kind of removed from this concept of bullying, and it didn't even really cross my mind until Ellie told me. She said that what had happened was after lunch immediately, I don't know how word got back to the grown-ups, but word got back to the grown-ups, and all of the boys were sent to do outside activities, and all of the girls, both students and teachers, all the females, went into a big group room and talked about this all together. And no names were mentioned. I'm guessing because this idea of intimidation or coercion, right? Mm-hmm. Ellie and her friend did not feel comfortable saying it was so-and-so said this, right? And so after the group meeting, Ellie went to a teacher she feels really close to and said, this is who it was, and this is what she said exactly. And that teacher said, Ellie, you can come to me anytime. And she said, this is what we call mild or moderate. It was an M word. It might have been micro, what something, to kind of a low level bullying. Right. And I don't think Ellie knew that word either, but it was really interesting for her to tell me the story, and I don't know if you guys heard listening, heard fifth graders talk. It took like 3 years to get this whole story out, right? Like all the details and all the blanks and all the backstory, and but finally I got the whole story. And I'm grateful so much that the school was so responsive. The school does a beautiful job of wrapping students up. And one of the reasons we're at that school is they prioritize emotional development over everything else for the kids. But, so I think that they responded well. And guess what? The very next day, after I think it was first or second block, I got a phone call. Ellie says her tummy's hurting her. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Right. But it was interesting to me to have that kind of brought close to home and, have it be labeled as such, and then to read that definition and say, well, I see that, right? This gal, for better or for worse, for some reason, right, has the ability to step in and act as a ringleader to the rest of the fifth grade girls. Last year was a fourth grade girl. She did the same thing. People follow her, and they often follow into unkind events. And it's not like, oh, let's go rescue the wounded bird over here, come on everybody. That's
Right.
not the type of things they're following into, right? It's not sweet things that happen when people follow this gal. And but she has a very magnetic power over these, or within this group of girls. And it seems very random it's not always Ellie, right? It's very, very random and very mixed who this gal is for and who she's against, and who's kind of in her group and who's not in her group, and who she sidles against her with and who she sidles for. And it's just been such a journey with this, but it's the first time I've ever heard anything called bullying when it came to my child and her class experience. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we as adults underestimate the social dynamics that our kids have to face every day. And whether you want to label it bullying, harassment, unkindness, like, I don't even know if it matters, because I think part of what you're touching on is like how it impacts your kid. She is avoiding school, right? Or she is physically manifesting a tummy ache because of this stuff. And I think that's what we need to focus on, because even when I read the definition, I mean, I'm like, okay, so what is aggression? Is it like you got to get punched in the face, or is that passive aggressive thing that this young girl does, right? And I think we as adults view it, right? We either take kids will be kids, right? Or we're like, not my kid, you're unkind of, I mean, I have that reaction sometimes too, right? Like, I know my kids have had issues with peers who are above and beyond unkind in ways that I think children are normally unkind at this age. And, my reaction is, mama bear wants to come out and unleash on a kid, so I think really kind of whether it's called bullying or it's just mean girl stuff, right? I think really what parents need to focus on is like, how is it impacting your kid? Because you could have a kid like Ellie who's impacted by it, and maybe some other kid, maybe Ellie's friends, like, who cares? I don't know what her stance is. Maybe she's bothered too, right? But like, we respond differently. And I think what really matters is helping our kids navigate this stuff, because it's fourth grade, it's fifth grade. I've got adolescents on my caseload. They're struggling with their levels of social media bullying, and and even when they don't have access to it, they hear about it from their friends. Look what someone said about you, right? So like, even when they withdraw, it's in their face. I love how the school responded. I think schools, and I get it, it's like, teachers are stressed, there's so much going on, but here's the thing, if these kids don't feel safe in a classroom, there's no learning happening anyway.
That's right.
The social stuff is taking over. It needs to be addressed. I know my kid's school does the same. There was some issues between 2 little girls. I don't know if it was bullying. It was a lot of unkindness And the school got involved and started doing like group classroom emotional social
Yeah.
development conflict resolution stuff, because clearly that there weren't the skills. You know, I in the conversations I've had with my kids, Ansley just got in the car yesterday and was like, so and so was at me today all day. Everything I said, shut up, you're stupid, don't care, like daily.
Mm.
And so our conversation is, you know, do you need to reach out for help?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, who do you go to? It would be her teacher, most likely. And she's like, I don't feel like I'm at that point yet. Okay, but that's a resource because I'm not there. I can't, you know. And the other conversation we had was really trying to deep dive, you know, into the psyche of this kid, right?
Mm.
Why do you think they're so unkind to you? Right? It doesn't make it better. It doesn't excuse it. But I want her not to take it personally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Someone
Yeah.
being mean, and this is stuff that I know as an adult. And honestly, I work with adults too that struggle with this because we're all human and our feelings get hurt, right? But like 99.9% when someone dumps something on you or is unkind to you, it's usually has nothing to do with you. It's all about that person's experiences. So you look at a little girl like this, like, why does she need this much power and control? Why does she have to, um, you know, power play people and make people feel like crap to feel better about herself?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and as a school or whoever, like, how do we address this? As a parent, how do you address this if your kid is the bully? Because, you know, I'm sure like it's not hard to find yourself the parent of the bully either, right? Like, you don't know what your kid's doing at school and who
Wow.
they're unkind to.
Well, right. And they're probably, if they're the ones being unkind, they're probably the least likely to come and say, hey, mom, guess what I did today?
Yeah,
Right. As
right,
opposed to if they've been, you know, having somebody else having been unkind to them, they might be more inclined to tell you about it. Right. But
right,
yeah, to self-confess probably is rare.
right. I mean, when you were a kid, because again, this is not, I think this is, I'm also going to throw out there before I go into when we were kids, but like I do witness how adults interact. And let's be very real.
Mm-hmm.
Adults are not doing a great job being kind either. I have seen some things online that make me want to scream. And
Mm.
it's strangers that don't know each other tearing each other down over a difference of opinion. You
Yeah.
can disagree. You can say, I don't agree with that. But to like, I've seen like personal attacks. I mean, I lived in a community in Florida when we were down there. They had to shut down our Facebook community page because these people were so mean to each other
Yeah.
and threatening each other on Facebook, neighbors, like you live next door to these people, that the HOA had to get involved and shut it down. Like,
Wow.
think about that. These are adults, these aren't even children. So, one of the things I think we need to be really aware of, whether it's us as therapists and like the work with our clients or us as parents, is how are we navigating the world? Because if we're using our power, our words,
Mm.
our insecurities to like unleash hell onto someone else and make them
Mm.
feel like crap, then like what example are we setting?
Yeah.
You know, what are we really doing? Um, but I do remember being a kid,
You do?
and I don't. I mean,
Wasn't
yes,
that long ago?
it was like yesterday,
Lost all those brain cells yet?
last week when I was a child. No, but I remember people being mean to me, and I remember being not very nice to other people.
Mhm.
Like, not like this little girl, but I'm sure I hurt someone's feelings or said something unkind or was, you know, snarky or
Mhm.
defensive or whatever, you know? And like, I think some of it as adults, we have to be very, I think, mindful of how we categorize. And the way I've said it to my kids, even though I think my daughter's little classmate is a bully, I basically said, they're struggling. It's someone having a hard time.
So
And
here's what I struggle with that though, right? So let me play devil's advocate for a minute.
yeah,
I love this idea of like getting into the other person's psyche so that your kid learns to not take everybody else's stuff so personal, right? And that it becomes something wrong with them that they did wrong or something that's bad about.
right.
So like how do you find the balance, right? Because my kid is so compassionate. Like she I hope she says this is what she says to me. She says she feels very confident in herself and loves herself, which I love that so much. But she is very, very forgiving and very compassionate for other people from that place. And I worry about her continuing to engage, right? And kind of take it and take it and take it. And she'll stand up for herself in the moment. She does have a fiery side to her, and she'll say things in the moment, but it's like like, so that very day, right before the school day was over, she, I forget who went to whom, but she interacted with the main girl, and the girl apologized profusely, and she said she's so sorry, that she knew she did wrong, and that she wouldn't do it again. Literally, like, I mean, if I had a nickel, okay, like, this has been going on for so long. I personally have little faith
Yeah.
in that, right? I mean, I just don't like, if we get through the rest of fifth grade and nothing else like this has happened, I think it'll be miraculous, right? So I don't have any, I've lost all my hope in
Yeah.
this particular human being for being a consistent source of friendship for my child.
But that's the thing. So I think that's the nuance to,
Mhm.
because there is, you can be forgiving and understanding and empathetic. I can understand where someone's coming from, but if you treat
Mhm.
me a certain way, I'm going to understand that from a distance.
Exactly.
I'm
And
not
that's
going
what
to
I want for,
harbor ill
yeah.
will. I'm not going to target you, but we're also not going to be close. And
Yeah.
right, it's a
Yes.
little different when you're forced to be around people all day because again,
Mhm.
like situationally, it's a lot different. I can withdraw, and children at school can
Totally.
always. But I think it's finding that balance of how do you coexist,
Mhm.
play nice, whatever that might look like, right? And still hold your own. It's hard with kids though, and this is the conversation I have with my kids is they're learning too, just like you're learning how to navigate. And I struggle from both sides, from the victim of bullying, if you want to call it that, to the bully. Like once you're put in that category,
Mhm.
I work with teenagers that are like, I'm always getting bullied every year, consistent. They've fallen into this place, and I don't know what it is, right? It's like we switch schools, we switch friends. It's like I'm always finding myself here again, you know? Um, but I don't like to see the bullies fall into that label either, because I think if you get labeled something and believe it to be true, then why would you ever do different?
Yeah.
So I think it's teaching kids how to navigate those situations. Like I tell my kids all the time, you don't have to like someone, you don't have to play with them, you just don't get to be unkind.
Mhm.
You get to have boundaries, you get to assert your boundaries. You can't be mean for the sake of being mean, right?
Yeah.
Um, Now, whether or not they always follow that, I don't know. Again, they're 10 and 8. I'm sure they mess up, right? But I think there's some level of us as adults having to have some understanding of like, how do we help kids on both sides navigate this?
Mhm.
How do you help a kid who feels like crap about themselves or feels powerless find that in a way that doesn't harm other people, right? And
Yeah.
how do you take a kid who is super tolerant of that behavior from others to not harbor a grudge, but to also have some self preservation?
Yeah.
You know, and some of it is, you're talking about something that was pretty obvious, but some of it's super subtle,
So subtle.
and not that it is the stuff like, what was I was listening to something the day where it was like everyone went to a party and they all got like shirts at the party. So they all
Mhm.
wear the shirts the next day to show up at the party. So no one said you didn't get invited, but it's very clear you didn't get invited because we all are wearing the shirts the next day, right? To school or whatever.
Right.
Now, was that intentionally to upset someone? Probably not. It may have been more of just like, we all got shirts and let's wear them, right? But it hurt someone.
Well, and you know that those people knew, right? Whether they said like, okay, what can we do to harm so and so? No, probably not. But they knew somewhere along that process that other people would be affected, right? They knew
Yeah.
that it was in the back of their minds at some level, big or small. They
Yeah.
knew, right? And it was more important to them to feel like they were in than out. I heard this phrase, I've not heard this before, so I forget where somebody, one of my clients shared this with me. A client who's going through, oh, you know what? This is one of my teen clients. He's a senior in high school and was telling me about he's taking I think it was interpersonal communication skills. And
Nice.
I'm like, tell me, like, what are you learning? You know? And he was like telling me about these phrases, the in group and the out group,
Mhm.
right? And that manifests in so many different ways, right? He and I actually related it back to kind of his family dynamics, which was kind of an interesting thing. But this idea of like this, okay, the kids who went to the party, they created their own in group, right? And then by creating the in group, they automatically created the out group, whether the kids in the out group knew they were in the out group or not until the kids in the in group came to school with the shirts on, right? But there's a sense of power and belongingness that comes with being in the in group that people want to maintain. That's why all the other sweet little gals underneath the stairwell who were Ellie's friends 5 minutes ago sat there and didn't say a word, but kind of looked like in shock, according to Ellie, when this gal said, well, we don't want to sit with you. We're not your friend.
Yeah.
Right? Didn't say anything because they were in the in group in that
Mm-hmm.
moment. Right? And it happened so fast. Everything happened so fast. But to say, right, that's a big deal, right? And that's, we're kind of getting more down the rabbit hole of like group think mentality, which is a really interesting topic. But like when you're in the in group and somebody's influencing you to do things or behave in ways that are negative or harmful, but to not do so risks your position in the in group.
Mhm.
That's a big like pill to swallow, right?
Yeah.
I would say 90% of people would not swallow that pill. 90% of people are just going to sit there and either participate or at least be silent. Not a single person under the stairwell stood up and say, well, I like Ellie. I liked her 5 minutes ago. I'm gonna like her 5 minutes from now when you walk away. Like I
Yeah.
I'm out for this, They were just silent and waited until everything passed and then everything resumed to normal. But in that moment, when the leader of the pack was saying these awful things, nobody spoke out against it.
Mm. Yeah. Well, right. And I think some of it is self-preservation, right?
Absolutely.
Like, where is
Yeah.
the safest place to land? Okay,
Mhm.
with on this side, not
Yep.
stirring the spot, and then you secretly find your friend later and you say, "Oh my God, that was horrible. I'm so sorry." But you
Yep.
don't stand up in the moment. And I will say there are kids that do stand up. And those kids
Mhm.
sometimes have a hard time too, right? Because they're the disruptors of this social
Yeah.
scenario, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes those kids do get targeted. And so I can understand where the kids just sit quietly and say nothing.
Mhm.
Yeah, the social dynamics of school is no joke because I
No.
think it does start to become like that fourth and fifth grade is where there's more buy into that, right? Then you have middle. I mean, I remember middle school. Middle school was like this collection of tears and fights and tears and fights. I remember teachers doing what Ellie School did and calling a lot of group chats about some disagreement that somebody had because it got so like volatile because you
Yeah.
had no skills to solve issues and you're sensitive and upset and there's you don't have the skill set yet. And so
Yeah.
some of that is for your kids building social and emotional intelligence,
Mhm.
right? Building the ability for someone to understand that, like, again, it feels personal, but it's not personal. And again, whether or not my kids are, but their kids are probably like, Mom, like, it's personal. But it's
Yeah.
like, but it's not.
Mhm.
Like, why did you warrant that attack, for example? Like,
Mhm.
what,
Mhm.
you didn't hurt him. So why would they retaliate against you? But, it's easy for me to say when I hear about it and I'm not the one living it.
Right.
And our school does respond to these things.
Mhm.
Not all schools have the bandwidth to do that,
That's right. That's right.
right? If you've
And your
got a
kids are in
school
a school that's not too dissimilar from Ellie's, where they have a small class size too, right?
I mean, I think it's like 30 kids,
Okay.
28, 30 kids, but it's 3 grades, which has its own, interesting
Oh,
dynamics.
uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
So 30 kids among 3 grades.
yes.
Got it.
So right now it's fourth, fifth, and sixth grade,
Uh-huh.
which is also super interesting. But I actually think that tempers it a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because there's a mix of maturity levels. You don't
Yeah.
get the same group mentality. You might get your little cluster, but then there's the other kids that are older and younger, ideally,
Mhm.
right? That may buffer
Yeah.
where they are.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, it is hard, and it's hard for parents to navigate, right? Like, how do you know if your kid's being bullied? Like,
Right.
someone's being mean to me, okay, right? But then it really is looking at the frequency, right? I would say how it impacts your kid. I
Mhm.
mean, you have a kid that no longer wants to go to school because of that. That's a problem,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? That needs to be addressed. I know parents that have switched schools probably because the school couldn't or wouldn't, change things. Um,
And
and
that's tricky too, because like you said, I mean, it's kind of out of the frying pan into the fire. How do you know what you're going to get? You don't know. I mean,
yeah,
you can hope that you can get mad at one school and say, oh, well, a different school could do better, but you don't know if that's the case or not. I don't know if switching schools is always the right thing to do unless it's like blatantly like they're neglecting things or saying things that are just clearly not helpful or harmful, right, from administration. But when a school's trying, she's
yeah. Well, and I think it's also as parents, like just being able to tolerate the fact that sometimes your kids are going to go through some hard times with their
yeah.
peers. I mean, it's hard for me to tolerate that too. Like, I don't like when my kid's crying because someone
No.
was unkind to them, right? But like, I think Ansley came home one day, she was playing outside, and one of our neighbors said, "I will never be your friend," which is probably a true statement. She didn't want to be your friend. Ansley came storming and crying, and I was like sucker punched me. But like, it wasn't the best way to relay that message. But what the little girl was saying was she had a boundary. I don't want to play with you and be your friend. And she gets to choose that. Like, she wasn't, harassing my kid. She just wanted to be left alone. And my child did not want to leave her alone. And so I think she was like, this is the boundary I'll set. And so while we had to work a lot on, like, well, but you have to accept her statement too. She wasn't, targeting my kid. She just wanted to be left alone. And my kid was not doing that. So, but I mean, that was hard for me to sit with too, right? And so some of it's sitting with your kid in those hard moments.
I know it. I know.
Like, sometimes friendships are tough.
Well, and it's interesting because so yesterday was the day that I got the call that Ellie's tummy was hurting, right? I felt like there's a new front desk person. So the gal who has been with Ellie for the past 1, 2, 3 years at the front desk and knows all this, the store backstory around all this. Like, she left before the school year started. So we got a brand new gal at the front desk. And I'm sure she thought I was like the most neglectful parent ever. Cause my kid calls at like, or she calls me on behalf of Ellie at like, I don't know, it was like 10 in the morning, and she's like, well, Ellie has a tummy ache. And I'm like, okay, and so there was a time in the past when Ellie had a tummy ache, and I said, well, lay on your side for about, or the right side, I'm sure you know this, but as a family of functional wellness doctor, if you lay on your right side, that helps facilitate the digestive processes. And so often it will very quickly resolve in 5 to 15 minutes, right? So whatever it is, whatever sort of digestive distress might be happening, sometimes it's bowel related, other times it's just nervous tummy kind of thing. But laying on the right side resolves a lot of things. So I said, okay, well, have you tried laying on your right side? And she said, a little bit. And I said, well, go do some more. And ask Miss Jessica if you can have your phone, and then they can have their phones, but they put them away during the day, and I like for Ellie to have a phone in case there's an after school event where she stays, and she can connect with me and so forth and connect with her dad. So I said, well, go get your phone out of your car, ask permission to get your phone so you could text me to tell me if the laying on your right side worked or if it did not in 15 minutes, and I'll figure out a way to come get you, right? Because I was booked with people. But so she, of course, I knew this was going to happen. Oh, and I also told her use your oils, so we sent her with essential oils to school, which incidentally, as a kind of a little bit of an experiment, instead of sending her with digestive oils, I've sent her with emotionally calming oils. She has a blend that we call, or that we don't call, it's a doTERRA blend. It's called Peace, And then we have another oil she goes with, it's magnolia, which is similar in properties to lavender. So some really calming oils. And I'll tell her to rub those over her belly and kind of like around like her neck where she can smell them, and on her wrists and so forth. So I said, rub your oils on, lay on your right side, and then text me to let me know if you're good or if I'm coming to get you. And sure enough, she's like, I'm good, mommy. I'm going back to school.
Mm.
Right. And so I think part of that, right, that's another struggle of like, where do you kind of, to your point of like, okay, well, you could go to the teacher. Okay, I'm not ready for that yet, right? Creating this plan of like, how do you support them, right? That morning she said, I don't want to go to school.
Mm.
Okay, but we're going to school, you know.
Yeah.
You've got your oils, right? Like, you've got your support teachers. You know, you can go talk to the principal or the guidance counselor anytime you need to. We're going to school. Right. But like, I'm a mean mom, you didn't come pick her up. But yet I do believe in my heart of hearts that that's in her highest good. I think it's better for her overall, right? Academically, mentally, emotionally, to be able to stay there and to, as long as she has supports, right? Whether there's supports internally, think like her oils that she has in her backpack, or supports from teachers, peers, so forth, like for her to be able to stay there and navigate it, right? Then me pick her up. What do you think, Claudia?
Yeah, I mean, there's some sense of like empowerment, right? That like I faced this, I did it, I was able to, stay. I
Mm-hmm.
think avoidance can cause secondary problems, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
I
yeah,
don't want her to learn that every time something's hard, she just gets to go home.
yeah. Well, and for me, the really hard lesson working with, people of all ages is, I'm going to call it bullying, and we can define it differently, but like that type of behavior
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always cease just because we grow up.
Mm-hmm.
I work with
Yeah.
clients that have challenging behaviors at work. That
Right.
one that's super, subtle
Ugh.
aggressions, microaggressions, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, People experience that in their friendships and their social, groups, in the workplace, in school, and so I think one of the best things we can do is strengthen our kids to learn how to navigate it. And it is a learning process. Ellie's not going to complete fifth grade being like, I rock at this. She's not. It's going to be like, even as adults, we have to work on it and check ourselves, and create space where we can see things clearly. And I think it's arming them with the tools to navigate challenging people, because that person could be your boss and you may not have the luxury to quit.
Yeah.
Some
Mommy,
people
come
have,
get me.
right,
Yeah.
or just you want to quit and you just can't. You have to
Yeah.
figure out plan B, and so you're stuck there, right? And you're stuck in this environment, and there's a lot of ways in life where like we're just going to have to get resourceful
Mm-hmm.
and find the skill set. So I do think it's like a learning experience. Now obviously there is the threshold where it goes too far,
Right.
and you've got the kids that feel so isolated, so hopeless, that they make different decisions on how to escape that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole nother level to this,
Yeah.
right? The kids
Okay,
that,
so let's go there, right? So like, okay, as we start to kind of move into like the end of this, right? What, Claudia, can you speak to two things? First, what are some of the signs? What are the red flags, like where we need to be looking out, right? If we don't have a child that's coming and telling us, I feel this way because this is what happened at school, right? Or this is what is happening at school,
sure,
which I'm sure decreases as kids age, right? So that, I mean, I'm still hoping and praying and Lord making my child promise that she's still going to snuggle with me when she's 30 and talk to me about everything forever and ever and ever. Amen. But, for most kids, right, as they get older, they start sharing less, right? And so what do we look out for? What are some of the red flags when we need to know as parents that our kids are struggling, whether it's bullying or otherwise, right? And then what do we do about it, Claudia?
yeah. So I think for starters, it's looking for changes, right? Changes in sleep, changes in eating, changes in, I guess, loss of interest in things they used to find interesting, or loss of interest in school. school resistance, kind of like what Ellie was saying, like, I don't want to go, that avoidance of school. Um, if there's physical bullying, there may be injuries that can't be
Mhm.
explained, and your kid's like, oh, I just fell, right? That kind of like
Yeah.
thing where injuries that are kind of happening to your child. Lost things like
Mm.
I lost my books, I lost my phone, I lost my right things that can potentially be stolen from them, right? Or like
Yeah, or
taken
broken
from them.
teeth.
So
Mhm.
destroyed property, lost property, stolen property, if they're willing to admit that. Again, change in eating habits. Um, Kind of what Ellie was experiencing, this like somatic symptoms, right? Stomach aches, feeling sick, maybe they're faking sick to not go to school. Any changes in academics, loss of grades, inability to focus, nightmares,
Mm.
like would be a disruption in sleep. Um, Mood shifts that are not mood shifts are a little tough because as your children get older, there's going to be like hormonal mood shifts. So that might be a
Mhm.
little harder for all those with
Mm.
teenagers that are like, yeah, good luck deciphering that. But for a younger kid, you can see shifts in mood. You can see the kid that gets in the car on the verge of tears, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think those are the signs. The reality is kids aren't going to necessarily come to you
Mhm.
because, you know, uh, I think some of it does getting help make things worse. And I know I've heard this from my own daughter. It's just going
Mhm.
to get worse if I ask for someone for help
Oof.
because now that person gets in trouble. Now you're the target of that, right? It's this like cycle. I think it's this lack of faith that adults can actually manage it, to be quite honest with you. And maybe they're not super wrong because you
Mhm.
see where adults struggle to manage this. This is not an easy, there's no like solution,
Mhm.
or like easy solution. I think it comes with us as parents digging in with our kids from the day they're born on like how to be a certain way, right? And how to interact with people. But you always have kids that are, for whatever reason, have a harder time with this. You know, I think at this point, if you kind of are noticing all of those symptoms, it really is reaching out for help,
Mhm.
right? It's going to the school and advocating for your child, even if it means you have to be one of those quote unquote parents, right? There's nothing wrong with advocating for your child. Um, if the school doesn't know, how do they address it?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I do think for some people, maybe changing schools is necessary. I know
Yeah.
people that have
Sure.
homeschooled and done, all kinds of measures
Right.
to work around it.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, and I think also worth looking at, like, how do you know your kid is the one doing the bullying, right?
Mhm.
What do those signs look like?
Yeah, wow, that's a whole nother topic for another day. To add to a list of some of the things that what we can do, right? Obviously, we have therapy too.
We do. That's right. That's where we come in.
Remember we do those things? And then also, I've been pleasantly surprised with I only see a smattering of teens, and most of what I do is adults, but like when teens want to come to therapy, like they really will like talk, right? About things in therapy that they won't talk to parents about per se, or siblings and so forth and so on. And then I also love this idea of like I love this phrase circling the wagons, right? And maybe that's a southern phrase, I don't know, but this kind of concept of like, okay, when the going gets tough, right, you kind of circle up, like almost like a huddle up, right? And like, who are the people in your world that are safe, and are supportive, are loving, and really trying to focus and kind of getting back to basics on that, right? So lots of good quality family time and lots of wholesome activities where there's not a lot of social or emotional energy expended, time in nature, time, movie nights on the couch, and snuggle time, and time with pets, and um I don't know, maybe an impromptu mommy daughter shopping trip or something like that, right? Or daddy daughter date, or so forth and so on. And boys aren't immune to this either. My God, not at all. This is definitely across genders, but we have girls, so we kind of tend to think from that perspective, I think. But and then friend time, and maybe focusing on solidifying and strengthening and supporting the growth of the friendships that do feel like they're more supportive. So if there's friendships or relationships that are maybe painful for our kids, helping them remember that those aren't the only people in the world, right? And that there are friends who maybe kind of like poor Ainsley's experience with the neighborhood girl. Like there are plenty of friends who do want to be your friend, right? And let's invite some over for a play date maybe or so forth, right?
Yeah. And I think it's, again, a lifelong lesson of like, you are not how someone else treats you. It doesn't,
Mhm.
you're not, just because someone says you're something doesn't mean you are. And
Yeah.
building that muscle in our kids of, kind of like Ellie has that, right? This like, I like me.
Whew.
That is a little bit easier. It's a little easier if you feel secure in that, right? To combat what someone else is saying to you, even if in the moment it doesn't feel good,
Mhm.
but I think definitely finding support, I mean, I work with a lot of kids. I can't make their bullying stop, right? Or historically past bullying, right? But I will tell you that I am, because I feel like we have this conversation, you're like, oh my God, all kids are terrible. And I have some kids that blow me away on my
Mm.
caseload where we have conversations. I'm like, you are the most empathetic, emotionally
Yeah.
intelligent person I have talked to all week, and you're
Right.
a child. And so there are amazing kids out there that have empathy and are able to talk to kids and are supportive and are the one that want to be the ones that lift up and not knock down.
Yeah.
Right. And, I was interestingly just having a conversation with someone this week who was sharing when they were younger, they were bullying, kind of like what Ellie's friends experienced. They
Mm.
got dragged into another group, and the power dynamic was also there by age, and they went along with it.
Mhm.
And one of the things they were sharing was like they would do something and then hang out after and apologize because
Mhm.
it was self-preservation. It was, I don't want to be the target of this, so I will participate. And then I will linger and I will pick you up and tell you, I'm sorry, I just knocked you down. Right. So the
Ugh.
social dynamics, right? So what is a bully and it's like you had the bullied became a bully,
Right.
but like a really remorseful one,
Right.
and that was situational. Like once that dynamic disappeared, she no longer placed herself in that role, right? But it was like a survival strategy. So also talking to your kids who are not on the receiving end of
Yeah.
being bullied or be the bullied, but like to your kids who may come float in between in that like safe zone, right? Like, how do you advocate for those when you see something's wrong? Right? Like, how do you support the kids that are getting targeted and it's not right?
Mm.
And how do you support other kids and kind of having that? Because I do think if they can get support from their peer group, it makes all the difference,
Yeah.
you know?
Even if, yeah, golly. Claudia, life is so
I
hard.
know, but we can't solve the problem in this podcast, and
We can't.
we've scraped this. It's a hard topic. I mean, it's hard,
It's huge.
and
Yeah.
I think schools struggle with how to manage it,
Oh, yeah.
and adults struggle with how to manage it in their children and for
Mhm.
others, and it's tough.
Mhm.
Um,
Say again that resource that you found that was so much more beautiful than my Googling. Stopbullying.org.
yes. .gov.
.gov. Stopbullying.gov. Do you think that's a good resource if parents or teachers need a resource?
I don't
Or
know.
even
I
older
haven't,
kids?
I haven't dived into it too much. I also does not have a solution. um, but it it also does not cure any. But
No.
it does go into cyberbullying too, which is a whole other
Mhm.
thing we scratched the surface
Oh,
on
I
what kids
know.
are facing, and that's a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Um, so it does go into something. I will drop one little nugget I saw on there's a resource officer. I don't know where they are,
Mm.
and they have a Facebook page. It's Officer Gomez,
Okay.
and they posted something on cyberbullying the other day. And one of their things was like, don't let your kids on social media, then they won't be exposed to it. And then the question came up like, oh, well, again, what if someone shares it with them, right? Like a friend. And their solution, which
Yeah.
in theory is great. I don't know what practice will work out, but your child needs to advocate for themselves and tell them, friends, don't show me anything. I don't want to see it, and you will not. If you're my friend, you won't show me, so that you can not only block their access to it, but then they block who's bringing it to them, right? But that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of children having to advocate for themselves a little bit.
It's so much emotional maturity. Like, how many grown-ups would be able to be like, don't tell me the person who was talking bad about me and what they said, right? Like, that takes a real commitment to Zen and like boundaries and circling your wagons, right? That, I mean, wow, how many grown-ups would do that? I can't imagine asking a child to do that, or a teenager to do that. Maybe a
Right.
kiddo, but ooh. But
Well,
yeah, I mean, I think that that's a great like goal, but very difficult to attain.
yes, and I think you can attain, listen, if things are bad enough and you have no options, maybe that is something you do. But I
Mhm.
also, like, it kind of went against this whole, like, kids needing to connect socially with other kids, and you've taken
Yeah.
their ability to do that, and that's probably a whole nother podcast, but I don't know. I mean, we scratched the surface
Scratched
on
it.
bullying, and
We did.
we've gotten, somewhere
We got
halfway down the
there.
path.
We
It's
got
hard.
somewhere. Well, good. Well, hopefully listening to this will if not be helpful, at least let you know that you're not alone out there if you're a parent struggling with knowing how to love and how to support and how to direct a child who is privy to or party to bullying in any way, shape, or fashion. So we will be posting this podcast lots of places, and if you listen to it, you can find us on social media. Claudia is Mighty Oak Parenting, and my husband and I are Rob and Katie Truax. And we're on, where are we? Facebook, Instagram, and our podcast is on Spotify and iTunes. And feel free to leave comments, questions, and if there's other topics you want us to expand upon or move into, we'd love to hear and to do that for you.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks for joining.
Have a good day.
Bye.